scientific journeys and aspirations. So Mr. Ferren, as I stated to you guys previously, was previously a president for Disney and in their research and development department. He was also, I believe, if I'm correct, Bran, assisted in some of the technology in the Star Wars series, the movies.
I've worked on a whole variety of movies and embedded technologies and how production, computer graphics, and visual effects are integrated into films.
All right, so he's pretty spectacular and his resume is vast. As I stated before, you guys could see his TED Talks or um, his bio on Wikipedia. And in addition, I just put in the chat a link where he did a talk with Robert Downey Jr. for a podcast. You can also check that out if you'd like to after our session today. So without further ado, I will introduce Mr. Bran Ferren, who will speak to you guys. And he wants to see you, so please keep your cameras on, Krish and others, so that he can speak to you instead of speaking to names on the screen. Thanks.
Hi guys, nice to see you today and enjoying the prospect of talking to you. You throughout your educational career are going to hear many thoughtful, well-structured talks. This will not be one of them. I am simply going to ramble on about things that I think might be useful to you as you kind of move forward and decide what you're going to do with your lives. Some of you may have already done that. Others are on that journey, and some may be very confused. And so what I'd like to do is just talk to you a little bit about that and the intersection of art and design and technology and science, as well as some things you might need to learn about people and people, how they work, because it will affect your ability to be successful in your career. So that's sort of the topic area. We'll have time for questions later. You have a choice of sitting silently and not asking any questions, but if there are questions that are relevant to you personally as individuals that I can help you address, it would be a pleasure to, or things that are more generic, that's fine. You know, I'm not going to tell you how to study hard, how great school is, etc. I hated school, and I hated every single minute of school. I kind of liked it until, you know, sort of high school. And then I was bored and not really interested. And from my perspective, I was starting a company, I was doing design, I was doing engineering, I was doing electronic systems and computer interface systems, etc. And I had no interest in sitting and learning about geography or the history of Napoleon and a whole bunch of other things that people wanted me to learn about. I am not advocating this, but I didn't like school at all. And some people learn really well in school and being part of that process. There are other people less so. In my case, I found school was, you know, a place to meet people, a place to do things, but I learned most of what I was interested and knew about outside of it. I didn't graduate high school. I went to MIT. I spent a year at MIT, turned down a scholarship to Caltech, and decided school wasn't for me, and I was going to go start and do things. So please, none of you do what I did, because I don't want to hear from your parents and, you know, how could you tell these kids, you know, but the reality is we all learn in different ways, and what you have to do is discover what the best way is for you to learn as an individual. And if it's school, which works well for a whole bunch of people, that's terrific, but it isn't a substitute for later getting real world experience and seeing how things actually work. I found that I learned best by observing really top people in their fields working. And this included filmmaking, and this included theater. I worked in Broadway theater, I worked in television production, Hollywood movies, a whole bunch of fields, architecture, design, exhibit design, World's Fairs, a lot of rock and roll touring. You may have heard of groups like, you know, Pink Floyd and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. That's probably before your time. I worked with The Who, I worked with the Rolling Stones, I worked with REM, Depeche Mode, a whole bunch of groups that I learned about music and sound and electronics from, being on the road. But from my perspective, I tended to gravitate things that were equally scientific and engineering based, as well as equally artistic and design based. I had a lot of guidance counselors in school tell me I had to get serious and decide whether I wanted to be a scientist or I wanted to be an artist. Turns out it's not true. You don't actually have to get serious. And all of those topics, science, engineering, and design, aesthetics, are all compatible. They are not incompatible. And it will make you a better whatever you want to be if you have the perspective of those other fields as well. There is an aesthetic and beauty in how cosmology, the universe, nature, biology, how it all works and fits together, and the ability to appreciate both the aesthetics of it, as well as the moving parts, the technology, and the physics of it, I found important. My background is both of my parents were artists. My father was an abstract expressionist painter. My mother was an impressionist painter. And it was interesting to me that my dad, he was part of, you can look him up if you want. His name's Bran Ferren. He's in most American major art museums, et cetera. And he was part of a group known as New York School Abstract Expressionists, or ABEX. And they basically helped invent abstract art. Now, you grew up with abstract art around you for your entire existence. And so the notion of abstraction is something that you're probably familiar with. You may like it, you may prefer objective art. But it's interesting to me that we spent 2,000 years of recorded history with people doing objective art. And it was only until the beginning of the 20th century that abstraction was invented. And it went nuts starting in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And people like my dad were outcasts. They were rejected by the art world, by society, because what are they doing all these squiggly lines and funny colors for? What does that have to do with art? And one of the things you have to be prepared for if you're going to be involved in breakthroughs and innovation, people will think you're silly. They'll think you're wrong. They'll think, gee, she has a great mind, but why is she wasting it working on all this ridiculous stuff? And so from a practical point of view, you're going to be in a lonely existence if you're doing work that's at the cutting edge. So why would you do it? Because it's how you are going to change the world, and hopefully for the better. If you have a choice of changing the world, I'd recommend you change it for the better, not make it worse. You have both of those choices. Making it better is better. But if you look at, during my life as I grew up, a collection of people in the sciences made discoveries that fundamentally changed our understanding of our world and our direction. There was a guy named Stanley Priesner who came up with the idea of prions. I'm sure some of you or all of you are familiar with prions, badly folded proteins, not alive, and have the ability to create things like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and mad cow disease, Kuru, et cetera. And, the idea that you could have these just little geometric shapes that, because they're folded in a funny way, was going to all of a sudden have a fundamental impact on your life, including 20 or 30 years later, giving you spongiform encephalitis, et cetera, was considered ridiculous. And at the same time, once it was realized that he was correct, this was an astonishing breakthrough, which changed our view of a whole collection of things. There was a guy I met when I was at MIT, Frank Rowland, who was an atmospheric chemist and noticed a funny little thing with chlorine and chlorofluorocarbons and ozone and how that all bonds together in a very strong way, and came up with the conjecture that these chlorofluorocarbons, which at the time was in every can of hairspray, any can of paint, it was used for cleaning electronics, the Freon refrigerants, these are all chlorofluorocarbons, and they were considered to be this miracle, non-toxic, low toxicity, you could drink it, I wouldn't recommend it, but this thing that everybody said was this great godsend, a miracle of the modern world. And, his idea led to looking for and finding the hole in the ozone layer, which got bigger and bigger and bigger and was actually threatening life on Earth based upon increasing cancer rates, et cetera, et cetera. And this is one person who happened to look at it. There was a guy named Charles Drew who came up with the idea of how do we do large scale blood banks and have the ability to save millions of lives by being able to bank and store blood and categorize it and do a whole variety of things, which you would have thought would be obvious, but advancing that and transfusions, as the Mildred Dresselhaus, who fundamentally changed our understanding of carbon, and her work is now fundamental in looking at the global challenge of environmental carbon, et cetera. And, when I was, those of you who are computer science people, you look up Ada Lovelace and look at her contribution. When I was at MIT, my professor was Marvin Minsky, who's called the father of artificial intelligence, along with Seymour Papert. And these people were the bold ones who actually, at a time when computers were really thought of as being glorified adding machines, and why were they thought of that way? Because that's what they were. They came up with this concept that, well, gee, maybe it's a couple of thought and there's nothing special about the human brain, and that it actually can be emulated by computers, et cetera, and launched an entire field. They also, by the way, set back the field by writing a book called Perceptrons, which some of you may have seen in your computer science study, which basically talked about why neural nets and such won't work. And it turns out it was an eloquent, beautifully written paper, a book by two of the renowned people at the pioneering stage of AI. And it set back the field 20 years because it turns out they were wrong. And yet, if you're a grad student at MIT or at Stanford and you're going to study something that the experts in the field have said won't work, it has a great chilling effect. We see that going on today on something like cold fusion, where basically cold fusion was put forth as an idea that you could have non-fission based fusion, non-fusion in traditional senses. You're not going to yield neutrons. You're not going to do a whole bunch of things that everyone said had to happen with fusion. And during that process, it was demonstrated this work was not repeatable and the people doing it were disgraced. What really happened is all research shut down or went into the closet on that phenomenology, which turns out to be quite interesting. And is it going to be real? Is it still? We don't know, but the reality is almost nobody's working on it. And so there can be a chilling effect that happens. But why is it important for you to understand the role of the individual rather than just teams and groups? Because individual people come up with ideas and conjectures that nobody has ever thought about. Why? Well, if it comes to something like these fairly new or arcane fields, atmospheric chemistry, et cetera, 30, 40 years ago, nobody's really thinking about it, that you can have a field where you pick a new field to go into, and there might be of top people, people with the intellectual horsepower and creativity to be able to make a contribution. There could be 1, 2, 3, 6, a dozen people. So it turns out your brain power and your passion and your enthusiasm added to this can actually make a profound difference in the work of one person, is capable of meaningfully changing the trajectory of computer science. I mean, I think of friends and colleagues like Alan Kay. He invented the concept of the personal computer. He invented with his team at Xerox PARC object-oriented programming. And he came up with the idea of, when you think about concurrent desktops overlapping windows, the idea that you would have folders that look like folders and windows that overlap was his idea. And that permeated through today. Now, you could argue it's held back. KVM interfaces have held back progress on new next generation interfaces. Might be the case, might not be the case. But individuals just like you can have really dramatic impact on the trajectory of civilization or knowledge and impact everybody's daily life. Now, whether you do that through entertainment, such as at the Walt Disney Company, where our job is to create lifelong positive memories, bring families together, and create an optimistic view of the world. And people will argue, well, Disney isn't reality. Of course, it's not reality. If you want reality, stay home. That's reality. If you want to be entertained, you can go somewhere. How many of you been to a Disney theme park? Well, that's a good start. And you can move your hand. That's something even better. So one of the things that you do at a Disney park is you see science, engineering, technology, material science, storytelling, a whole variety of disciplines all put together to create experiences for you. The difference between a theme park and an amusement park, Disney builds theme parks, is a theme park is anchored by stories. Stories are a series of events in time with characters. That's what stories are. And I would argue stories is the only way we know how to remember things. You are visual creatures, whether you wish to be or not. If I say Statue of Liberty, you just got a picture in your head, if you're familiar with the Statue of Liberty, of the Statue of Liberty, and you can't help it. If you lived in the United States and I say World Trade Center, you have the image of those buildings, and you may have images of airplanes flying into them, and you may have images of where you were at that very moment. These are stories, and the power of stories is how the entertainment industry is anchored and the movie business, but it's based upon how we learn, and we learn by a series of visual images which relate to experiences, and that over time. One of the things you may not be aware of if you're heading in the direction of science and engineering is that storytelling needs to be one of your core competencies if you want your ideas to move forward. Because in order to get your ideas to move forward, you have to convince people to fund your research or hire you or let you work on it. And the only way you're going to do that is by telling compelling stories. That why should, of the 500 other people who have come to them asking for funding, and whether this is coming from a national institute or whether it's coming from an individual or a group within a company, why should they fund yours versus the other 500? And that's where storytelling is a critical competency. Another critical competency that you need to have, in fact, if we think about what your big six are, what are the six things that you have to really get right for you to have the kind of impact that actually changes our world, not to mention allows you to lead a pleasant life and have fun and raise a family and, live in a nice house or do the things that you are interested in. And when I talk about success, I am not talking about my definition of success. I'm talking about your definition of success, and you have to figure out what that is on your own. Nobody can tell you what success means. Nobody can tell you the impact. You have to figure it out. So when I say you be successful, I'm not saying my definition of what's successful. It's your definition, but they have common things that a test that has to meet. So the first one of your big six is vision. You have to have a vision. You have to have a vision of what your understanding, where you think your area of science or engineering or art. And by the way, newsflash, I know and have known and had the privilege of knowing some of the top programmers in our world. Alan Kay, again, the Xerox PARC gang. I know most of the people well who started the internet and did develop, Len Kleinrock, packet switching, a whole variety of people that I've worked with over the years. Java, again, object-oriented programming. From my perspective, having worked with some of the superstar programmers and coders, they are artists. They do not approach their work as if it were a traditional engineering discipline, step by step, quantitative, and everybody understands a direct path to how to get to a solution. They are artists who can sit back and think differently about how things work. Interesting when you look at statistics, if you take a superstar coder versus a pretty good one, And the difference in effective work output and contribution can be 2 to 500 times. So one person who's able to think creatively about coding in a unique and special way, like Bill Joy and folks like that, they are in productivity of changing the output, the equivalent of many hundred other people in the areas of application they're working in. So you get to figure out, are you one of those and you fit into that? So you're going to come up with a grand vision. Or are you a craftsman? So you don't do the great vision work, but you work on putting the plumbing and the nuts and bolts together to make it function. All of these are critical contributions, but you have to have a vision for how you fit. Second thing you have to have is trust. You have to have trust in your colleagues, your coworkers. You have to have trust in the people who you are working for and funding you. Because if you don't have that trust and they place it in someone else, they're not going to help you accomplish your vision. And by the way, for most of us, we all need help accomplishing our vision. Next one is talent. You're not going to do these things alone in most cases. And again, as these other people we talked about, or you look at Nobel Prize winners, it's teams of people because it's more than one person can do. And for you to succeed, you're going to need top talent to work with you and collaborate with you. And if they think you're basically an annoying jerk, the odds are they'll probably work with someone they think is less annoying or more fun to work with, et cetera, et cetera. So it turns out the social skills of understanding how to tell the story to get them excited about your vision, how to describe to them how they fit and how their role is critical to this, so that you have shared passion. Because the next thing after being able to attract talent is passion. You have to find what areas you are passionate about if you wish to be great. If you simply want to be okay or good, you don't have to have passion, you just have to work hard. If you want to be great and you want to change the world, you need passion. And that passion means that you would rather eat, sleep, drink, do all this other stuff, is all well and good, but you want to focus on your vision and bringing it to a reality and motivating a team of people. I knew Steve Jobs for a long time, and Steve, had no particular talent in computer science. And by the way, computer science is kind of a misnomer. If you define science, there's not much in computer science that has to do with the definition of science. That's why I say, again, it's more of an art, sort of like medicine. But if you look at the ability to take these ideas and make them well happen, passion is essential. And so that part of your job in getting yourself educated on the path is finding your passion. I would argue that again, design and storytelling, if you want to be an engineer, go hug an artist and learn about art and design. If you're a designer and artist, go hug an engineer and learn about that because it will make you a better person. And whether the cliche is learn how to do left brain thinking and right brain thinking, or it's actually probably more accurately front brain and rear brain. But you need to partner with people who look at the world differently. There are some people like Steve. Steve was a big idea person, not particularly skilled in computer science, not particularly skilled in design. He had great taste. But what he was able to do is motivate people to come together to execute these visions. The vision is collectively developed where everybody makes a contribution, but there's one person who's the leader whose job it is to maintain through thick and thin difficulties, challenges, keep it all moving forward. And that's what Steve did a great job of. He had great taste and was able to attract the best people, tell a story that captured their imagination and made them okay with working 20 hours a day and not eating unless absolutely necessary in order to make things happen. And therefore he was able to bring to the world a whole variety of things that the idea of simplicity, this phone changed the world. And prior to the iPhone, we had Blackberries and we had Motorola flip phones and Nokia, and we had people who were expert in the telecommunications industry. Steve, Apple, and the team came in with no qualifications in the computer business, and by the way, being considered a weird little computer company, and arrived with a vision of what this could do, didn't ask the customer and talk to the customer, because the customer would say, well, I want, more features. Basically, if you talk to the expert of the time, would have been a BlackBerry user, and said, okay, you guys are BlackBerry users, we're going to invent the future phone of tomorrow that's going to change the world. How many do you think would have said, take away all the keys, um, give me a battery that I can't change, so I'm going to go dead halfway through the day without, being able to plug in. I want a music player in it. I want a camera in it. I want a touch screen, multi-touch, etc. And I want, one thing more than anything else. And they lean in and say, what do you want? And they say, well, I want apps. And you say, what the heck is an app? Never heard of an app. What is it? They say, well, we don't really know, but we want apps, and we want them so badly. I want you to build a store into the phone so I don't have to go shopping. I can just buy the apps right on the store. That's what an iPhone is. And none of the users of iPhone's predecessors, like the BlackBerry or Motorola or Nokia phones, would have given you that list. It came because the creative team came up with a vision. Does that mean don't talk to your customers or users? Of course you talk to them and you understand their needs. And people like Jobs understood their needs, but more importantly, they understood their desires. And that a whole bunch of people, if chose between need and desire, will go with desire. And that affects how people buy computers and how they buy clothes, how they buy cars, a whole bunch of things. It's not just user needs, but it's user desire. If you're a great coder, but you don't understand desire and design of people, you're going to code and build something that's going to have much less impact than if you learn to work with or learn the other side of it as well. So from a practical point of view, if you're a big idea person, great, you're going to need people to work with in order to be successful to execute your vision. If you're a nuts and bolts person, just leave me alone and let me write my code or let me engineer this. Well, if you engineer it perfectly, but nobody cares, you're going to fail. So you need to work with the other side. So the idea is, how do you merge art and design with science and engineering? How do you develop code that is elegant to use? How do you build devices that are not just functional, but are beautiful? And that's what took people like Apple, that was considered a weird little computer company, and turned it into intermittently the most valuable company in the world. Meanwhile, while companies that were considered the big pioneers, Sears and Roebuck, put themselves out of business. All they had to do is take their catalog and put it online, and there. Wikipedia, astonishing contribution. The people who were in the business before it, like Encyclopedia Britannica, didn't think that a bunch of people sitting in their garage or living room would write a competitive product to them. But when's the last time any of you went to encyclopediabritannica.com? Not many. And so the reality is, in a changing world, Eastman Kodak invented digital photography and put themselves out of business by thinking, oh, this could be a threat to their core business, because they thought their core business was making film. It put them out of business. They invented it. It put them out of business because they thought it was a threat rather than something to embrace and run towards. I've worked in those fields extensively. So if you have a smartphone, you have somewhere between 2 and 5 things that I invented in it. So pinch and zoom, where you can scale and all that, that's our invention. And if you look at the famous lawsuit between Apple, who sued Samsung for $1.9 billion for, stealing pinch and zoom. They lost that lawsuit because our patent was the prior art to that. The idea of using multiple cameras together to make the effect of a zoom lens, that's my patent for Intel. If you look at inertial scrolling, so if you move something, it keeps moving, that's my patent again. remotely bricking a phone. So how do you make it zero eyes and render it? That's my patent. And there's another one I can't tell you about because there's going to be a new lawsuit coming up. All of these ideas happen because of the ability to combine the visual experience, the haptic, the tactile, the emotional with the scientific and technical. So I'd urge you, if this is something you haven't thought about, you might want to think about it a little and learn how the other people in the world think about things, because neither of you is right or wrong. Again, if you're the heads down coder, you need to code something that's going to be great at the end. And if you know how to do that by yourself, terrific. If not, you need to get the people on the other side of the brain who understand how to do that. The final thing is education. And by the way, I mentioned storytelling before, and that's essential, because if you want to get people inspired, if you're not good at storytelling, that's going to severely limit your ability to get your ideas out of your head and infect others with why they should be passionate. And this doesn't matter if it's biology, it doesn't matter if it's understanding cosmology in our universe, doesn't matter if it's physics, doesn't matter if it's coding, computer science, big data, AI, ML, it's all the same. You need those skills as well. And education is something you have to not think of as a thing to put behind you, but it is a lifelong commitment. And you need to be continuously educating yourself in how other people think, how they perceive things. In some ways, it's a little like learning how to see the world in color. So imagine you were born colorblind and you just had monochromatic black and white vision. And I'm describing to you, this is red. Don't you think it's beautiful? And you say, looks gray to me. And I say, no, it's red like blood. And you say, yeah, gray like blood. Or no, it's like Surround's shirt. It's bright red. No, it's gray. You can talk all you want about the color red, but if a person can't perceive red because they don't have rods and cones that give them a combination of monochromatic low light vision and as well as brighter light color vision. And again, if it's like most of you, which are presumably a trichromate, there are quadrichromates. Bees see the world in ultraviolet. And if you look at flowers in ultraviolet, you'll see a very different picture than you see looking at them under visible light. Part of your job is learning how to see the world in color. And by that, I mean seeing the things that are not immediately visible to you, but you can learn to appreciate. Marvin Minsky, artificial intelligence, was a pianist, and he loved music, and that he said helped him think about his work in computer science. One of the last books he wrote was called The Emotion Machine, where his conjecture, having moved on from AI, was, can machines have emotions? Do they have emotions? Can you give them emotions? And his observation, which I thought was very striking, was that if people spent the same amount of time imagining how you could give a machine emotion, rather than complaining about how it's not possible to have emotion in machines, we would have already done it. And so positive thinking, learning how to take your vision, capture it in such a way, learn the storytelling skills to get other people excited about it, that is the necessary core to pull together the kind of activities, whether it's just you or collection of other people. You have to motivate yourself to do this. And so understanding these questions is just as well. But you have to understand that learning, I dropped out of high school. They later gave me a diploma because I designed the media studies program curriculum for the school. So they decided to graduate me by giving me the course credit for the course I designed. Thank you very much. But MIT, I was invited, I want to be considered to be the new director about 15 years ago of the MIT Media Lab. And, I did the keynote speech at MIT on, their MIT Engineering Day and so on and so forth. And when Chuck Vest, who was the president then, called me and asked me to do it, I said, you do remember I dropped out, Chuck? And he said, well, you'll always be part of the family. I don't regret having gone to MIT for a year at all. I met Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert, and they both were on my advisory board and working with us when I started my company, Applied Minds. And they were with me as my engineering fellows, along with astronauts and several others at Disney Imagineering, which I was president of. About 4,000 people, by the way, in 200 different skill sets, but a perfect example of how you have to bring the two together. But this ability to continue to learn is essential. So if your thought is you're learning your school, you put that behind you, you just get to work, absolutely wrong. You have to continue your commitment to learning and understanding, and whether it's seeing the world in color or whether it's learning how to communicate to others to get them excited about what you do, whether it's building organizations with a unique process that are capable to execute things, it's really all the same. I was excited to talk to you guys today because you have an amazing life ahead of you. And the more you can open up your mind to understanding that there is a way of thinking, which is the way of thinking you have now, but there are a multiplicity of other ways of thinking about the world. And if you can learn those from people, whether it's mentors, people you work with, people you observe, that will broaden your perspective in a way that enables you to accomplish things during your life and career that will make it a lot more fun, a lot more exciting. And if you are interested in making a contribution to the world, and you don't have to, by the way, it's optional, is going to put you in a much better perspective of understanding how to accomplish that. How do you learn about storytelling? Well, you can read a book. You can also just go to movies and pay attention to the movies you love and how they are communicating to you. It's the same thing with go take a type of book you would never imagine reading and read it and see, why other people thought it was something great. Lots of ways to do it. I can't tell you what works for you. What worked for me was a little bit of school, getting to be basically literate, and then going out in the world and starting and running companies and working with people and collaborating with the best of the best. I spent a lot of time finding out who was a great cinematographer or who was a great audio engineer, getting to meet them. A lot easier now that you have an internet, and offering to work for free. Could I just hang out and help? And by the way, when they discover you're actually not completely useless and you can do something, they might actually pay you as part of the process. But I never worried about a career path. I still don't know what I want to do if I grow up. But to me, it's constantly moving to new things. People ask, what's my favorite project? The answer is always the same. It's the next one. I'm not nostalgic. I don't particularly look back very often, except, gee, I did that badly. Maybe I can learn to do it better this time. Failure, if you want to innovate, is part of the process. In fact, it's not optional, it's necessary. If you're not prepared to fail and you're not failing on a somewhat regular basis, you're simply not trying things that are hard enough. And at the same time, if you're working for someone and you're obligated to deliver something that has to work, you have to inform them, gee, I've got a plan B, which is a safe path. I know how to do this. But this plan A, if you're willing to take the chance on it, and it's risky, will be 10 times better, but it has a reasonably good chance of failing. How would you like me to do it? Well, most people will say, well, tell me more about it, which is where your storytelling skills have to come in. Or they'll say, no way, go away. I don't want to experiment with our clients' money, et cetera, et cetera. You get those answers too often, you may decide that you're working in the wrong place. And you may need to either start your own place if you have the passion for it, in which case you need the storytelling skills to get people to fund you and back your company and that sort of thing. So, again, I don't want to lecture to you about this stuff because I don't have the answers. I don't even have my answers, let alone your answers. But I can tell you, having worked in a lot of different fields professionally, aerospace, my little company now, we design buildings, we build satellites, we build propulsion systems, we build ground vehicles, we do a whole variety of other things. Expedition vehicles, if you look up Caravan, you can see a little bit about that, one of our internal R&D projects, which is also so I can drive my 12-year-old daughter around the world, which will probably happen when she's about 25 at the rate the construction is going, but that's a whole separate problem. But anyway, I really love the idea of talking to you because, again, you represent our future. And what people like me are doing is hopefully doing things that make the world a little better place, a little more productive, a little more fun. And fun is okay. It is okay to have fun. It is okay to smile. Smiling is good for you. It releases chemicals into your system that actually cause your brain to work better. So if you don't know how to smile, learn how to smile. It's good for you. So I'm going to stop talking and happy to take any questions any of you might have or any of these topics you'd like to push on a little more, or you tell me.